And now we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Greg Core, the Director of MSIP.
Thank you, Swati, and greetings from a very chilly Washington, D.C. I think my camera's on, but if not, you could see that I'm wearing a down vest. It got down to the high 30s here in Washington last night. It's warmed up a little bit, but still a little chilly. And we have decided to turn our heat off for the year. We're not going to turn it back on. We're just going to put on more clothes and hope that it warms up here shortly. So welcome to this month's DMS, Differentiated Monitoring and Support call. And as you know, earlier this year, Osep decided to pivot its DMS work to focus on the new administration's emphasis on reopening schools and ensuring that all children, including children with disabilities, are provided the services to which they are entitled. Consistent with that pivot, today's call will focus on 3 items. First, we'll cover the American Rescue Plan, including the approximately $2.6 billion that was specifically targeted for IDEA. We saw that monies were included for Part C, $250 million, Part 619, $200 million, and for 611, I think it was $2.58 billion. So a significant infusion of money to assist SEAs, school districts, early intervention providers with reopening and resuming services. Earlier today, I sent out the FFY 2021 allocation tables that many people have been asking for. It specifies the regular amounts, not the ARP funds, but the regular amounts for our 3 formula grant programs. For the second segment of our call, Jennifer Simpson will briefly discuss those tables and what states need to do to update their FFY 2021 IDEA allocations to include the current information. The third segment of today's call will feature the COVID-19 related tools and resources from 4 of our OSEP-funded TA centers: NCSI, IDC, ECTA, and DAISY. So we will launch our presentation. I did want to mention that if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, or at the end of the hour, near the end of the hour, we will open up the call for questions that you may want to ask verbally. So without further ado, I'm going to turn our call over to Matt Schneer, who is wearing a lot of hats these days. He's the Associate Division Director for our DMS work. He also is leading our physical implementation group, and he's a team leader. Matt, would you like to start the call off?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Greg. We can go on to the next slide, please. I hope everybody is doing well during these continued challenging times and enjoying whatever weather you do have out there. Well, Greg noted it's chilly out here. I would say it's also quite sunny and nice in its own way, but sort of like in a fall-like way. In any case, as Greg mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about the American Rescue Plan. As Greg mentioned, there was significant amounts of money that were specifically earmarked for supplementary funds to our regular IDA allocations, and you see the amounts listed there on the slide for Part B, Section 611, Part B, Section 619, and for Part C. We are continuing to work with colleagues across the government, including Treasury and the Office of Management and Budget, to finalize some details of how these funds will go out and the requirements around them. We know you're all anxious to get information. We're anxious to give it to you, but just know that we will provide additional information as soon as we can. I know that Greg had a while back released to you estimated allocations for each of your states under ARP. We will release the final allocations and additional guidance on the use of these funds as soon as we can, and the website that's listed there is a place that we're going to be posting all of this information moving forward. But there are a few things that I think I can highlight for now. If we go on to the next slide, please. So some of the key takeaways. We do know that IDA ARP funds, or ARP funds, depending on how you want to talk about them, must be used for allowable purposes under their respective IDA programs. It will follow the IDA requirements, much like if you were around during the recession, the Recovery Act, or ARA worked as well. At this point, we believe that the funds will be supplemental funds for, it says here for LEAs, this means for the Part B program. The important point here is that under the Part B program, the funds that are set aside at the state level for state level activities, those amounts, those reservations are set by inflation, not the size of the award. So despite the fact that there is an increase in your award under Part B, that will likely not increase the amount of money that you can set aside at the state level. Rather, all of those funds will flow, additional funds will flow out to your LEAs. We do anticipate that these the ARP funds will be coming out under a separate GAN with a sort of what was called an alpha under the CFDA, with a separate number for it but related to it, to allow for those funds to be tracked in a different way. But stay tuned for more information on that. We do want to note that this question comes up a lot. ARP funds cannot be used as a substitute for state or local funds in either state maintenance of financial support calculations at the state level on Part B, or maintenance of effort at either the local level for Part B or for MOE. So they cannot be used to substitute for those state or local funds. We will and are working on additional TA on the use of these funds. We anticipate providing a series of different documents, including a fact sheet and different guidance documents on both the requirements around using these funds and potentially best use of these funds in alignment with the administration's priority, as well as addressing some of the issues that also came up during the ARA era about how to use an infusion of funds that are sustainable, that you can use them in a sustainable way that won't cause issues moving forward. So again, watch this space, that website that's listed there, for updates as we continue to provide you with additional technical assistance. Okay, next slide, please. I also just want to call your attention to the fact that while the IDA ARP funds represent a significant increase in funds specifically earmarked for IDA, it's important to recognize that all of the funds that have been provided for education during the pandemic through the CARES Act, CRSA, ARP, through the ESSER grants, are a much larger amount of money than the IDA funds. It's close to $200 billion at this point nationwide. And that it's important to note that ESSER funds can be used for any purpose under IDA, specifically to address issues as a result of COVID-19. We are working closely with our colleagues across the department as they look to provide guidance on ESSER funds to be clear about how these funds can be used to benefit children with disabilities. And we think it's really key and important that you all are at the table when decisions are being made about how to use funds in different ways that can support the needs of children with disabilities during this time. So look for upcoming information on the use of these ESSER funds. There's a link there for the website where specific information related to ESSER is posted and will continue to be posted. So we suggest that you continue to pay attention to that moving ahead. And we can then move on to the next slide. I think at this point we can I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, to Jennifer Simpson. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt, and good afternoon, everyone. As Greg mentioned earlier, he sent out emails this afternoon to all Part C coordinators and state education directors special education directors, I should say, to share the allocation information. And so we're pleased to report that for FFY 2021, we had increases across all of our programs. So increases for Part B and 619, as well as for Part C. In addition, the legislation provided the sub-granting process for Part C as a available function that Part C programs could use as they handle their fiscal matters. For the Part B allocation in particular, and with that email, I want to make sure that your attention is drawn to the information about Section 619 and special calculations that had to be done this year. You'll also notice that with the allocation table for 619, there's some additional columns in that table. If you have questions about any of that, please send that information either to me or to your state lead, and we'll be sure to respond to you about that information. Now, let's move to the next slide. So you have the allocation information in your hands. With that, there's some work you need to do with your grant applications so that you can get them finalized and prepare them to send to us. So for Part B programs, that means that you have to populate your interactive spreadsheet. And in the email that Greg sent you this afternoon, you had several attachments. So you had the summary table for Section 619 as well as for 611. In addition, you had the document that allows you to access your state-specific interactive spreadsheet. And I also included a screenshot with the email that Greg sent to you to provide instruction on how you actually find your state-specific spreadsheet, because I know sometimes that can be a challenge, or if you're a new state director, you may not understand where you have to go within that document to get your information. You should not be populating any total allocation amount for your spreadsheet. So if you're finding that that information is not showing for you, for your state, then please send me an email so we can get that problem corrected. For Part C programs, you have Section 3. So you have the budget section of your application document, and that's the piece that you need to now populate with your 2021 allocation information. Once you have those sections done, then you're ready to provide the application to us. And this year, as in last year, we have the same grant flexibilities because of COVID. So we need you to send us an email, and that email should come from a state government email address. And the email should include a PDF copy of your application with an electronic signature by the application due dates. And so for Part C, we're talking about May 7th, and for Part B, May 21st. And so those dates are right around the corner, as we all know. Now, I know some of you have already begun the process of finalizing your documents, and that's great. You just want to make sure that you have the signatures, have the date with your signature, and have completed all the sections to make your document a fully approvable document so that we can flow the funds to you on July 1st. Next slide. After you send us the electronic version of your application, then we still need that hard copy, but you have much more time to get the hard copy to us because we are also extending that flexibility again due to COVID. And so you have until August 2nd of this year to get us the hard copy. Now, we've heard from a few states that are ready to send hard copies now. I want to ask you to hold those if you can for a little longer, and instead make sure you get the electronic document to us first. And then after that, move forward with sending us a hard copy document. Information as far as things you need to do to finalize your application, instructions about particular sections of the application document, and importantly, the section on submission guidance is all contained within the grant memo for Part B and Part C. And so in the emails that Greg sent you this afternoon, I had a hyperlink added there to take you directly to those memo documents. And there you'll find the email address that you should use when sending your Part B or Part C document to us, as well as the mailing address for us. And then one final note, and that has to do with the extended Part C option. So because of the amount of the allocation we have for 2021 this year, that triggered the availability of the state incentive grant again for the extended Part C option. So if this is something that your Part C program would like to explore, please reach out to us, contact your state lead before the application due date. So we'd like to hear from you before May 7th so that we can set up a special TA call with you to walk you through the option, talk about the requirements, explore whether or not the SIG or state incentive grant is something that you'd like to pursue, and then move forward and providing support to you. One important reminder with this is that you are not expected to have your policies and procedures for the extended Part C option finalized by the application due date if this is something that you want to do. So we'll work with you over the summer to make sure that you get everything done, complete your public participation for this requirement so that you would be able to implement the option in the fall if this is something you'd like to consider. So please just reach out to your state lead and then we'll just take it from there. Next slide. Now we're going to transition to a special part of the call this afternoon. Back in March, we did a special TA call where we invited our Osep funded TA centers to share with us some of the tools they've created. And so we spoke about some of the materials that you could use as resource documents. And as a result of that call, we found out from many states that they wanted more information. They want to know what these tools were, how they could be used, if they were Part C versions of tools that could support states and how they evaluate local programs with regards to how they're addressing pandemic issues and so forth, and particularly looking at policies and procedures that have been crafted during this time and crosswalking them with requirements and regulations and making sure that everything is in place as programs move forward under this challenging set of circumstances. So to that end, we've invited several speakers this afternoon. We have two speakers that are representing ECTA and DAISY. So we have Megan Venn for ECTA, Grace Kelly for DAISY. And then we have Terry Williams-Valentine for NCSI and Nancy O'Hara for IDC. The resources that they'll share with you are optional tools. So these aren't documents that Osep requires, but these are certainly helpful instruments that you may find will assist you as you are evaluating your policies and procedures and as you are considering any changes that you may want to make to how you're operating your programs at this point in order to address the circumstances under the pandemic and certainly what's necessary for reopening. So I'm going to turn it over now to our guest presenters and let them take it from here.
Thanks, Jennifer. I think if you go to the next one, I think we start with the ECTA and DAISY work. All right, thank you. So hi, everyone. I'm Megan Venn. I'm the co-director of the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center. And I'm joined, I think, by Grace Kelly, who's also with the DAISY Center. And similar, I think, to what you'll hear, I think, next with what Terry, you're going to share that NCSI and IDC did. We at ECTA and DAISY, we created a COVID-19 guidance for IDA programs, a policy checklist for Part C leaders. And so if you want to go to the next slide, essentially what this is it's a checklist that is really aimed for you to support state and local Part C leaders. So we think that this can be used both for your lead agencies and local lead agencies with reviewing, your policies, state and local policies and guidance to ensure consistency with IDA requirements during the COVID-19 pandemic. You'll see that the document, I know it's a little bit small, but you'll see that it, sort of has a topic, it'll share a requirement, and within that, that's going to sort of give you some information on what it says in regulations, and then also any guidance that was provided during the COVID-19 pandemic. You'll have the options to really be able to check whether you whether your policies and TA guidance address the requirement, and it'll also help you to think if there's any follow-up needed. You can keep track of any of the sort of links that you know, or documents. This will allow you to have a tool that kind of has everything housed in one place. And then it'll also allow you to do some follow-up actions that maybe you need to take or want to take based on your review of your policies. And I do want to say this, I think the format, NCSI and IDC, you developed this sort of format, and we, as we did the Part C one, thought, why would we change something that was working pretty well? And so we use a very similar, it'll look very similar to the Part B one, except it uses the Part C information in there as well. Or not as well, it uses the Part C information in there. If you want to go to the next slide, we think that this resource is really useful for, to allow states and local programs to review what your current program policies are, to really ensure that you're assessing your implementation of your IDA requirements. And it allows you a place and a space to document that implementation of IDA requirements, which could be really helpful as you're preparing for, DMS calls, or as you're talking with your Osep state contacts. It could be a really useful tool in that way for you to keep track of your information. And also, it allows you to sort of convene staff and relevant stakeholders to review your program policies and guidance within the document, and identify any potential follow-up actions that you think you might need to take based on your review. On the last slide, I'm going to share too that, these are some of the topics that are in the checklist. And we have, it goes through evaluation and assessment. We talk a little bit about, or not a little bit, we talk about exceptional family circumstances, your IFSP development and review. There's things about use of funds or funding virtual services. I think you can go to the next slide if that would be, if we're able to go there. And then we'll conducting in-person meetings. It also talks about sort of prior written notice and due process, transition. So you can see the full list here of the things that we talked about. Now I will share, we were really looking for things that had guidance during the COVID-19 pandemic related to them. So it's maybe not fully, it's not everything, but we did want to make sure that we were clear that as new things came up, at the top of our checklist will show a date where this has been updated. So we think that this will be updated as needed, as new questions come up or as new things come up as well. And I think last, I also wanted to share that these will be up. This checklist is not up yet, but it will be up very shortly. And I know on the last slide, it'll share our websites at the ectacenter.org and the daisycenter.org. And I'll put all of that in the chat as well for you. But I think it'll be important that there's lots of other resources on our website that as you're looking through your policies, that could also help you with if you decide that you need to take some actions. There's some resources already on the ECTA and Daisy Center websites that could help you with that. And as usual, we would love for you, if you want to use this tool, or if you're interested if you need support, to please reach out to us. You can reach out to your state liaison, or you can reach out to me, and I'm gonna put my email in the chat too, so you can email me and I can make sure that you get to the right person. And I think last, I just wanted to share too that this COVID-19 checklist will be up on the website, like I said, shortly. And it'll live within, we have a COVID-19 page. And so there's lots of things on that that are also useful for you as you're looking at your policies and practices related to remote service delivery and distance learning, or resuming in-person services, or other things related to the COVID-19 pandemic that will be available to you as well. And so I wanted to give just a quick overview of that, and make sure that we had time for questions, and that Terry could share what NCSI and IDC have done. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it back to or I'm going to turn it over to Terry to talk a little bit about the NCSI tool, NCSI and IDC tool.
Okay. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm not sure everyone can see me, but maybe Swati or someone else can help me, can confirm that you are hearing me, and it can also help me with visual on the other end of this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we can hear you. I'm going to send you a webcam
Perfect.
request and see if that'll help you turn your camera on.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You know.
As usual, everything I have the Midas touch on every piece of technology. Thank you very much, Megan, and Jennifer, and Matt, and Greg, and colleagues for inviting us here today. I'm really glad to be here this afternoon on behalf of the National Center for Systemic Improvement and my colleagues at the IDA Data Center to share the couple resources that we've put out recently to help you with the DMS pivot activities. I'm glad the format was helpful to our partners at DAISY and ECTA. And in building the format for these tools that we're going to be presenting here, I wanted to make sure that we wanted to make sure that states and LEAs also had the information and tools that they needed in order to evaluate how you're doing in the context of providing IDEA Part B services and supports in accordance with IDEA during COVID and the pandemic recovery period that's upon us. So if you can please advance to the next slide, I'd be grateful. We have put together two different resources for you in reviewing different legal requirements under IDEA statute and regulations, as well as the different special education guidance that Osep has issued since March of 2020. We highlighted a series of different requirements within those guidance documents and within the statute and regulations that would be most helpful to you to assess what your own state policy and TA guidance that you've provided to LEAs and to your own staff looks like on the other end of this. The two resources that I'm going to be speaking about today, you have received directly via email. State directors have received them directly via email from NCSI's Director Rory Fitzpatrick, and they're also posted on NCSI's website. I will have later in the presentation a link to those resources for you so that you know exactly where on the website to obtain them. So this first resource is particularly for states. It's oriented, this COVID-19 guidance for IDEA programs, policy and TA checklist is oriented for state leaders to review what policies and guidance you have provided about IDEA Part B requirements during this period of time. There are these links to the legal citations and also to the Osep guidance that has been made available from which these requirements are derived. And so it allows you to go back and check the primary source information to find out the origin of these requirements that we'd like you to take a look at as far as your own guidance and the TA resources that you've been able to provide during this period of time. As Megan articulated, it's a lot of the same things that you'll see in the Part C guidance documents. We talk about, difference being, we talk about IEP development and amendment, provision of FAPE, timelines, our use of funds, due process, levels of support, consent, among other things. You can actually, as a state, edit this particular tool, insert your own state guidance or other relevant information that you have about the TA guidance and the policies that you've issued, and also identify any needed follow-up actions that you may have on your end to dig into things a little bit deeper, or to maybe issue new information and identify new supports, new TA guidance and supports on your own for LEAs. And so in addition to helping you identify where you are with your own guidance and resources, this tool can also help guide the discussions that you're having with your OSEP state leads about IDEA activities during COVID. So this is just a snapshot. You'll see a very similar format as Megan was saying, but this is the snapshot of the TA checklist for SEA leaders. If you could advance the slide next, I would appreciate that. Several states also reached out to us to say, is there a companion resource for LEAs? So we've put together this guidance for IDEA programs, the self-assessment checklist for LEAs. And this is a local-facing self-assessment that can be used by locals to take a look at their own policies and staff guidance on IDEA Part B activities during this COVID period. Very similar to the state checklist that you saw above, but certain requirements are described with a little bit more specificity at the request of our partner states who took a look at this with us, because they're focused more specifically on LEA action, underlying LEA actions. So as states share this, if you find this something like this is helpful to share with your LEAs, as you share this, you have the ability to tailor this resource to include any state-specific requirements that you have established during this period of time also that go beyond the IDEA requirements or the Osep guidance that's already been issued. So both of these resources are adaptable by you for the specific purposes that you have for them. If you could please advance to the next slide. These included in this presentation for quick reference for you are the links to the policy, to where we're posting these policy and TA checklists on NCSI's website. So this should be quick reference for you as you receive this PowerPoint as Osep posts it online. And the next slide, please. And as I'll repeat what Megan said in this context, we are here to help you with whatever it is that you need. Included on this slide is a link to where NCSI and IDC post their list of state TA facilitators. Don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions about these particular resources, or if you have any need for support from your TA facilitators to participate in, listen in on some of the calls that you're having with your Osep state leads, or in following up on some of the activities that may be identified that you'd like to do after your calls with Osep state leads. We appreciate your partnership, and we appreciate all that you've been doing during this very difficult time to support students, families, and their educators. And we are here to help with whatever it is that you need. We're hopeful that these two resources can give you the appropriate frame to do your own self-assessment and to assist LEAs with doing a self-assessment of where things stand with regard to COVID guidance. So we look forward to taking any questions that you might have about these information and resources. And otherwise, I'll turn things back over to Matt.
Thank you so much, Terry. Much appreciated. And thanks to Megan as well. I want to just say how grateful we are for the terrific partnership we have with our TA partners in providing these resources. In addition, I know that Kate and I have been talking to our TA partners, and many of you may have been contacted by them about focus groups around our protocols, and we're looking forward to hearing from those and in continuing to engage around the DMS spaces as we move forward. So as Terry said, I think we're up to the point where we can take some questions. I know that I did see that there was one question in the chat, which I'll start by addressing and then see if we have other questions. So Barbara McGowan asked whether ARP funds will be included in calculating the 50% MOE adjustment for LEAs. And so what this is referencing is the requirement, the regulation under 300.205 that allows LEAs to reduce their LEA MOE by up to 50% of in federal funds. And so the answer to this is yes, we anticipate that will be included in those funds the ARP funds would be included in those calculations, and obviously this will provide an opportunity for many LEAs across the country to take advantage of that adjustment. I would note a few things about that. When we will be providing additional guidance on this as we move forward. There are specific provisions related to what LEAs can take advantage of that, specifically that they have to meet requirements as a determination, and that, excuse me, that they cannot have been identified with significant discrepancy. We'll be providing, as I said, guidance on this. I think it is also noteworthy that obviously this happened during the era as well, and there had been concerns raised about the way determinations were made. So that's something that you'll want to be careful about and making sure that that's being done in an appropriate way. I would also just note, just like this requirement regulation will take into account the ARP funds. That is true for, as I mentioned, for other IDA requirements, including such things as proportionate share, CIS, and other kinds of things. And so look for guidance that we'll be issuing about how to take into consideration the ARP funds when you're doing those types of calculations. So I don't know if we have any other questions in the chat or anybody's raised their hand. Swati, do we have anything else or other people?
Yep, we have a number of questions. We actually have one hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and call on them. It's Paula Gibson. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, or request to unmute you. Do you see? Right, I don't think it's letting me unmute you.
It looks like you're self-muted as well, so if you're hoping to speak, we might have to unmute you and you might have to unmute yourself.
All right, well, we can go on to the questions in the chat. So the next question is from Matt. To be clear, what did you say you mean? What did you say you mean the additional IDEA ARP funds cannot be used when calculating the LEA adjustment to MOE when there is an increase in the IDEA allocation?
Okay, I'm not sure if I misspoke, but what I meant to say was that they can be used in making that calculation. So they would be considered as part of the additional federal funds that would trigger the ability to take the adjustment.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Todd Harrigan. Any guidance on LEA MOE requirements due to COVID-related closures?
We don't have at this time any additional guidance on any additional flexibilities regarding that. I would urge you to take a look at the existing exceptions and guidance that we've issued. You can also talk to our fellow partners in the Center for IDA Fiscal Reporting, who may be able to provide you with some TA on that. And you can always reach out to us if you have direct questions. But we don't have the authority to provide any additional exceptions beyond what is currently in the law without further action being taken by the legislature.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Kat Dominga. Does the PDF application submitted by the states to Osep need to be 508 compliant?
No, you don't have to worry about making that 508 compliant for our purposes because we don't post those documents on our website. However, if you are going to continue to post that document, just in the interest of transparency, then that's something you may want to consider doing to meet the requirements for your state.
Great, thank you. Next one is from Todd Harrigan again. Would the IDA ARP funds be included in the IDA allocation for a district for the adjustment for LEA MOE?
Yes, so I think what's going to happen, and again, please be patient with us as we work out some of the details, but I think that what's going to happen is that you will likely get two GANs reflecting both the regular IDA allocations and the ARP allocations, and in turn you will provide your subgrants to your LEAs based on both of those allocations. Probably something you'll work out on your state level, whether they are also separated like that for tracking purposes, but the total amounts will be considered the increase in IDA federal funds that will trigger that adjustment for you. And we will be providing more written guidance on how this will work in the future.
Great. Next question is from Valerie Arnold. Why did some states receive a decrease in their federal allocation? What are the contributing factors?
Matt, would you like to take that?
Thank you, Jennifer. So there are some, if you look at the email that went out, some information there. On the Section 619 grants, there were some adjustments made to account for an error that was in our budget services tool to calculate previous 619 grants, which resulted in some states getting more funds than they should have and some getting less. So it is possible that your state may have gotten a somewhat smaller 619 regular allocation, which we hope will be offset then by the ARP portion of the funds that will be coming out. Otherwise, the exact amount of a specific state's allocation is based on a fairly complicated formula that I don't want to try to misspeak about, but there are minimums and maximums that come into play. And if you have further questions about your specific allocation, feel free to reach out to me or to somebody on our fiscal team and we'll get you that information.
Great. Thank you. Next question is from Andy Gom. He asks, what is the expected period of time that states will have to expend and liquidate ARP funds?
So, as I said, we anticipate the ARP funds will be treated as supplementary funds to the FFY 21 funds, which should mean that the period of availability should be the same as those funds, which would mean that 21 funds would need to be obligated by September 30th of 23. Under the uniform guidance, there's actually an extension of the liquidation period that will take effect with this coming grant year, making it 120 days, which would mean they would need to be expended by January 31st of 24. I think I'm doing my year's calculations there correctly. I will say that that is what we anticipate giving. That was that's the information that our counsel's office has given us. As I indicated, we're having some final conversations with the Office of Management Budget and Treasury. So if there's anything different than that, we will notify you.
Great, thanks. Actually, before we get to the rest of the questions pane, that we have two hands raised. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute them. First is Eileen Schran. I'm request that you unmute.
I had just typed in a question that related to the decrease in the 619 grants as well. I was asking if that was the same for Part C. We looked like we were receiving a decrease from our fiscal year 2020 amount as well. So based on what was sent out today.
Yeah, no, the corrections that I referenced are specific only to section 619. Any questions about if there was a decrease in your Part C allocation, please get in touch with me or somebody, your state lead, and we'll try to see what the explanation is for that.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. We also have a hand raised from Dave Phillips. I'm going to go ahead and ask him to unmute. He put his hand down, so never mind. So we have another question from the questions pane. Any potential for FFY 2019 IDEA funds to get a one-year extension waiver as FFY 2018 did?
Sure. Thank you for that question. I know a lot of people have been asking about that, and I can only give you some preliminary information on this. So what's being asked about is the flexibility that we provided for 2018 funds for Part B programs and for Part C programs that were part of an Ed Lead to extend the period of availability of FFY 2018 funds for an additional year. What's important to recognize about that is that flexibility that we were able to provide came out of the CARES Act. Unlike some of our colleagues across the department, under IDA, the Secretary does not inherently have the authority to extend the period of availability for IDA funds. The CARES Act had a specific provision that did extend that authority to the Secretary for IDA FFY 2018 funds. We've had some discussions internally about if there is any way that that flexibility could also be extended to 2019. I don't have at this time a definitive answer for you, but I don't want there to be high expectations on this. The indications that we've gotten right now was that the CARES Act statutory language was limited to 2018. The conversations are ongoing to see if there is any way to extend that flexibility. But as of now, it does not look like that will be a possibility for us. And again, for people in the Part C world, it was already limited, as you know, under 2018 because of the language in the CARES Act was very specific only to giving the ability of state educational agencies to request the waiver. We were only able to extend it to Part C programs that were ed leads, part of an SEA based on that, although we did look into other possibilities. So I think if there is any flexibility around 2019, it will likely be under the same parameters with limitations on Part C.
Great, thank you. So the next question is from Nora Perella. To email the Part B app in instead of a digital signature, is a scanned wet signature okay?
Yes, a scanned wet signature is acceptable.
Okay. That is the last question I see from the questions pane. And there aren't any other hands raised. So that's all I see right now.
Okay, well, we'll give people a moment. I'll vamp a little bit. I want to let you know that Greg Core had to depart to take his son to baseball practice in the chilly DC weather. So on behalf of Greg, I want to thank everybody, our TA partners, our state partners, and everybody else who's listening in for participating in today's call. I also want to thank everybody for their patience in waiting for the allocations. I know on our last national TA call, those were questions that Greg was getting, and we're glad that we were able to at least provide some of the information that you're eager for. I know you're still waiting for more information on ARP. Just note that the way that this played out was the provision that provided for supplementary IDA funds in ARP was added literally at the last moment to the legislation, and there have been a lot of questions that we've had to get settled. Every time we thought we had all the answers we needed, somebody else weighed in with more questions. So we're working as hard as we can to provide the answers as quickly as we can to you, and we know you're eager to get them, so please stay tuned. Did anything else appear while I was talking? Otherwise, I think we can get everybody 11 minutes back in everybody's busy days. And I will thank you, and feel free to contact us in the many ways that we make available for you to do so. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.